And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall discuss the revised 2020 Appropriation Act.
All right, the impact of the coronavirus on the global economy has forced many countries around the world to review and reduce economic activities. And even before the pandemic, the global economic outlook as presented by the International Monetary Fund, as the IMF, for 2020 was already fragile.
Very true, Claire. And in light of this grim reality, countries have been adopting a raft of measures to mitigate the effects on their respective economies. Nigeria, for instance, has had to take more than a second look at the 2020 Appropriation Act, which was earlier signed into law in December of last year.
Now, that second look culminated in the revised budget for the year 2020, which was passed by the National Assembly, of course, in June and signed into law for immediate implementation by the President on the 10th of July. Now, this is mostly in response, that's according to government officials, decline of crude oil prices across the world, and also impact of COVID-19.
This revised budget of 10.8 trillion naira is an increase of at least 260 billion naira over the level of expenditure initially proposed in the 2020 Appropriation Act. Now, the rationale for this, according to President Muhammadu Buhari, is that the 2020 amended budget underscores the administration's firm commitment to effectively contain the spread of COVID-19 and protect the lives and livelihoods of Nigerians.
Indeed, Kingsley, and also the icing on the cake of this revised budget, Kingsley, is that the President has promised that the MDAs will get nothing less than 50% of, the amended budget. And of course, that's to ensure that they intensify capital projects and, other deliveries and ensure that, all the laudable objectives of government, are attained.
Well, as economic and financial experts continue to review the federal government's quick response, as it were, with the revised 2020 Appropriation Act, one question to, of course, ask is what are the likely positive impact of the revised budget? What are also the likely implementation challenges? What are the quick wins? And more essentially, how will it perform in mitigating the effects of coronavirus and safeguarding the economy from the pressures that are obviously external?
Indeed, don't also forget that, Kingsley, I know the Minister of Finance and National Planning, Budget and National Planning, was here on Monday and she spoke extensively on issues, arising from the revised budget. But today we will expand this conversation, of course, to include other guests who will share their own perspectives on, of course, the revised 2020 budget. And that will be our focus this morning on Good Morning Nigeria Midweek Edition. I am Claire Adelabu Abdulrazak. Thank you for joining us and, of course, welcoming all of you to the program.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague Claire to also welcome you to the program. We're broadcasting live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. It's a slightly wet morning here in Nigeria's capital territory.
Cool morning.
Yes, and the temperature, of course, is dropped. So we hope that those who are on the road will be more cautious because the roads can be slippery at this time. In the course of our program, we have regular complimentary segments, and these include newspaper review, business, and others. For now, let's join Comfort Amodu, who is sitting by, as we always say, with the highlights of the morning news. Good morning, Comfort.
Good morning. Hello and welcome to the morning news at 7 a.m. Our report coming in from the National Center for Disease Control, NCDC, says 463 new cases of COVID-19 have been reported in the country, bringing the total number of confirmed cases to 33,616. The 463 new cases recorded from 16 states and the FCT shows Lagos has 128, Kwara 92, Enugu 39, Delta 33, Edo 29, Plateau 28, Kaduna 23, while Oyo has 15. Ogun and Osun reported 14 new cases each. Others are the FCT with 12 cases. Ondo and Rivers have 9 new cases. Abia has 8, Bayelsa 5, Ekiti 3, while Borno has 2 new cases. Lagos remains top on the number of cases per state chart in Nigeria with 12,711 cases. The FCT comes next with 2,687 cases, while Oyo is third with 1,882 cases. There are now 13,792 discharged patients with 754 deaths on record. Vice President Yemi Osinbajo has been speaking on why Africa must join forces to break the walls of secret corporate organizations' ownership in corruption fight. The Vice President, in his message to the Independent Corrupt Practices and Other Related Offences Commission's 20th anniversary, held via webinar, says the devastating effect of secret ownership and beneficial ownership on economies across Africa requires the stakeholders on the continent, including governments, must cooperate to stem the tide of the phenomenon.
Unscrupulous individuals who are paid to use social media platforms to make outrageous allegations against persons perceived to be fighting corruption. The technique is not new. The idea is to tar everybody with the same brush so that you cannot recognize the truly corrupt or even the truly corrupt activities. We must devise even new legal strategies to ensure that these dirty tricks not only fail, but are penalized.
Meanwhile, persons found guilty of kidnapping in Nigeria are to face life imprisonment, as Senate has passed a bill amending the Criminal Code Act 2004. The bill now awaits concurrence by the House of Representatives.
Its passage into law will address the lingering issues of statute of limitation in the prosecution of rape as well as defilement cases. Assuming kidnapping results in the deaths of that person kidnapped. So what is going to happen? Because that guy should face death penalty.
The Minister of the House of Representatives rather says some individuals and groups have formed the habit of filing what it calls unnecessary litigations against the National Assembly. Such actions, it added, contradicts the principle of separation of powers, and the House is set to amend the Legislative Powers Act.
This bill seeks to insulate the institution of the National Assembly from such unnecessary litigations.
The matter is not ripe for adjudication. It's not ripe for adjudication. It is only upon at the time when the matter has been concluded and signed into law. You don't preempt a matter. Signed into law, then you can go to court and say the matter is illegal, or the bill is illegal or unconstitutional. Not before that.
Minister of State, Petroleum and member APC Edo Governorship National Campaign Council, Timipri Silva, said the people of Edo State, especially supporters of APC, have agreed to work to reclaim the state back to the progressives' fold. Timipri Silva disclosed this at the APC National Secretariat after a closed-door strategic meeting ahead of the September 19th governorship election in Edo State.
Every South-South APC member is of the consensus that we must reclaim APC because that is our toehold in the South-South.
The minister added that current development in the price of premium motor spirit, otherwise known as petrol, in the country is as a result of government's bold step taken to deregulate the sector in the interest of the people.
To subsidize fuel with all these trillions of naira.
Moving on, the Supreme Court has declared virtual court sitting constitutional. The court struck out the suits filed by Lagos and Ekiti state governments, challenging the validity and constitutionality of the virtual court sittings procedure for being speculative in nature without any valid course of action. A 7-man panel of the Supreme Court, led by Justice Bode Rodis Vivor, declared that virtual court sittings are not unconstitutional. It further held that virtual court sittings are presumed to be valid and not been declared unconstitutional by the Apex Court. The panel maintained that the chief judges of the states that had issued practice direction provide for virtual sitting when convenient had the duty to enforce the directive. And that concludes the news highlight for now. Good morning, Nigeria. On revised 2020 Appropriation Act continues immediately after the break with Kingsley and Claire. I'm Comfort Amodu. Good morning.
Main way coronavirus spread is when infected people sneeze and cough. Small droplets of fluid expelled by cough or sneezes are laced with viruses looking for new respiratory tracts to infect. When a sick person sneezes around someone who is healthy, the virus can land in the nose, mouth, or even the eyes, causing an infection. Symptoms can include fever, cough, shortness of breath. Symptoms may appear within 2 to 14 days. Seek medical advice if you develop symptoms and have been in close contact with a person known to have COVID-19, or if you live or have recently been in an area with ongoing spread of COVID-19. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest television network. In this time of despair, our country, Nigeria, needs us now more than ever. We stand a chance to save our great country, Nigeria. A chance to rise up from this pandemic stronger and better. What will be the gain if we do not learn from other countries and observe the lockdown to stop the further spread of the virus? If we loosen our guards and allow this virus dome our very existence, then what have we gained? This is the call to every Nigerian to unite as one and stop the spread of this deadly virus. Stay at home and stay safe. Remember, the virus doesn't move unless we move. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest television network.
For over 70 years, we've practiced healthy hygiene habits together. The world needs us to keep our fight going against germs. So let's wash our hands for 20 seconds regularly. Dettol. Protect what's worth fighting for.
We have observed the lockdown. We have practiced the measures in order to curb the spread of the virus, but we can do better. The coronavirus spread is increasing daily, and only together can we cut down the numbers and defeat the spread of the virus. Remember, COVID-19 is not a death sentence, and a recovered patient cannot spread the disease. Do not stigmatize. Do not hesitate to report any case, or if you have come in contact with anybody that has been infected with COVID-19. If you have cough and fever, please stay at home and call your state hotline. Find state numbers at www.covid19.ncdc.gov.ng. Remember, it is for your own good and for the good of every Nigerian. Let us do better and defeat the virus. Together, we can do this. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest television network.
She cried. She cried in anguish and in pain. She bears the scourge of her grief. She toils in vain for justice and succumbs to silence. He gloats over his malady. Like a beast, he pounces with no remorse. Her cry meant nothing. Her pain feeds her shame. Like an orphan, she is left to grieve in solitude. But no more will she she cry in vain. Her adversaries will henceforth bear the brunt of their bestiality. Rape is evil. Rape is a plague, a pandemic of monumental consequences. We must unite and kick it out of our society.
Connect with NTA and stand against rape and rapists. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA.
All right, it's midweek's edition of the program Good Morning Nigeria. We are live on the network service of Africa's largest TV network, the NTA. Time now to look at trending business news, and in it, Nigerian exporters are encouraged to explore other forms of trade export, of course, to survive the impact of COVID-19. Comfort Amodo has the details.
According to statistics, Nigeria shipped $53.6 billion worth of goods around the world in 2019 and has the potential to generate $2 billion from yearly spices export, as spice trades are expected to reach $20.99 billion by the year 2024. Despite a steady growth in the value of Nigerians' agriculture exports, experts say it is pertinent to further look inwards to unlock the potential of other exportable products, as they emphasize on production and consumption of local produce and contents. Considering the rise in cases of infections of coronavirus, prompting tighter guidelines worldwide and stalling demands of some global value chain, hence the need to explore other forms of trades to expand their export from other sectors of the economies.
You'll be shocked that in Nigeria, we cannot even wear the made. Some of us don't wear made in Aba. We say it's made in Aba. But trust me, most of those products are going to West Africa, even Central Africa. But a lot of Nigerian products, when it comes to finished products like leather, like our shoes, the Aba boys, and you can read about their statistics as well. They're exporting quite a number of things from the Southeast. What about clothing and textiles? We also have those that are stepping up on the fashion scene. And most of our garments are finished products, finished garments. Ankara, they're quite tropical and they're very beautiful. But the beauty of it is that some new markets are opening up as well to products that some of us probably wouldn't have known, would see, the export light of export would be beamed on them. And one of that will be our herbs. Actually.
And here are the closing figures of trading activities on the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange.
All right, thank you very much for the business package and Good Morning Nigeria. Coming up next is Newspaper Review.
All right, time to introduce a newspaper reviewer by Atoyebe. Luckily, the sleep didn't keep you down in bed.
No.
I mean, the rain.
No, yes. It's the kind of rain that makes you feel very lazy and reluctant to get out. Absolutely. So lazily, I got out of bed. I have to be here. Good morning, Claire.
Good to have you with us.
Good morning, Kingsley. Good morning, Nigeria.
That's right. Good to see you.
All right, should I start with the Punch?
Yes, please kick off.
All right, let's begin with the Punch this morning. And it's dwelling as its lead story on the 774,000 workers recruitment. That's the caption. But the bolder caption says, National Assembly set for hot session as Buhari backs Keyamo. And the two riders to that, Labour Ministry opens job portal, invites applications from job seekers, and President Buhari telling Keyamo to shun federal legislators. It's unfortunate, says Rep. That's the lead story here. I think we should just take the stories one by one. Kingsley, I don't know what you say.
Well, the lead
you have a similar report.
The lead story for the Nation newspaper is also on the 774,000 jobs. Kayamu gets Buhari's nod on 774,000 public works jobs. With the writer, state selection panels begin recruitment process. You have an excerpt from that story, and it says, I have fresh instructions to proceed with the program as directed by him, that's the president, and to continue to supervise the program in accordance with the law.
Bayo.
That's exactly what the Minister of State said, and accordingly, the portal of the Federal Ministry of Labour and Employment, Public Works gov.ng site is now set to be opened and has started functioning. Tempers were flared, if you recall, on June 30th when they met the committee, the joint committee of both House of Rep and the Senate. The Senate President also even lended his voice to say that the National Assembly is committed to the project. Having appropriated it, they are going to follow it to the core, and therefore that project should be suspended as the joint committee had indicated. But now, from all indications, the papers are reporting that the President is going to write to the National Assembly asserting is the right of the executive to carry out the project, and the Minister of State for Labour Employment is the person to drive it through the National Directorate of Employment.
We had a conversation on this, related to this, Kingsley, and one of the editions of Good Morning Nigeria. And I think I raised this issue, whether legislative issue involving this particular matter would affect the implementation, because it is part of the stimulus plan. Yeah. I hope I'm right. Yeah. It's part of the stimulus plan.
It is.
Yes. So now we're seeing a kind of, I don't know, the reps now.
It's a matter of responsibility. It is the duty of the legislature to appropriate. It is the duty of the executive to execute. Okay. Now, what the National Assembly is saying that we want to supervise your execution. And by law, according to the Minister of State, by law, he, as the chairman of the board of the NDE, has responsibility to carry out that supervision. And also, he now has the authority of the president to carry out that duty. So, members of the National Assembly, some of them were saying that if the executive was not comfortable about it, they should go to court. Perhaps the executive now will be saying, if you are also not comfortable about it, go to court. It is everybody trying to assert their authority, but there must be limitations about where everybody's role should begin and end. But all said, cooperation between the legislature and the executive will ensure that the ordinary Nigerian, the 774,000 Nigerians who are expected to benefit, will not be obstructed from this laudable project.
Well, I think the point which we made sometime in the past, while we were reviewing this as part of the stories in the newspapers, is that what is afoot here is legislative boundaries versus the authority and powers of the executive branch. The Honorable Minister of State for Labour and Employment had indicated that there was an encroachment on executive powers and that the legislature didn't have the powers to proceed with what he said he wanted to do, to, as it were, unpack the entire project and give directives as to how the project will be implemented. The Honorable Minister of State also did say that the legislature had some 10 to 15% allocation of the numbers of potential recruits into the public works program. So that apparently seemed to be no issue that came up. When the legislature said that if the executive was dissatisfied, it should go to court, I did raise the point that litigation is not costless. And it is not the business of the executive to go to court in all instances. The executive says, these are my powers and I'm proceeding to do this. At all times, the president did not say otherwise. And so the minister, of course, functions on behalf of the president. And he was proceeding with it. And what he has said now is, go ahead with it. All of the idea of saying that, look, place a freeze on this, let's resolve all. Some of these matters could actually have been treated in camera, as it were. In other words, using the back channels without the formality of a committee. Now, the National Assembly could very well argue, oh, we represent the people, this is a public interest matter, we need to go on there, and they want to see how the project is being executed. Look, there are also federal executive bodies that are in charge of this. Assuming there is no equity in the distribution of the jobs, you have a Federal Character Commission in the first instance that could also look into this. You also have a Public Complaints Commission that could look into this. And then the National Assembly itself also have a Public Petitions Committee. That's a standing committee. The one set up now is an ad hoc committee. And the impression created, unfortunately, was that this ad hoc committee was meant to simply divvy up the stakes, and let's see how it goes. But here we are. Let them proceed.
Let them proceed, as you say. Okay, another interesting picture story now on the front page of the Punch again is it's right there. I don't know if we get the picture story, and it says wives of Nigeria Police Special Force Squads personnel and their relatives protesting alleged poor welfare packages of their husbands along the Abuja-Kaduna Expressway just by Zuma Rock Village near Suleja. You can see the pictures, the women, and I don't know, Bayo.
Well, it's worrying because when people have put their life on the line to serve the nation, and unfortunately maybe some of them have lost their life, if there are entitlements and they are not paid, it becomes a big problem, because any officer in the uniformed services who in the service of the nation assumes that in the event of him paying the supreme sacrifice, his family that he has left behind will benefit from their rightful entitlement. But when this is not forthcoming, it is worrying. I will quickly want to link that to what happened just over 2 days ago. Officers were moving, police officers were moving to Katsina to be part of the war against bandits. Unfortunately, just after Jaji, there was accident. Some of them died. About 7 of them died. 11 others are seriously injured. I must commend the Inspector General of Police. He has given immediate instructions that their benefits must be paid immediately. And other police doctors have been sent to go and look after those who are there. People who are serving the nation must have their benefits and entitlements given utmost priority. And so my sympathy is with these women who are complaining.
Well, you know, the greater challenge ultimately is how do we look after the vulnerable in our midst? The plight of widows is common knowledge. The plight of persons who are physically challenged is also common knowledge. The plight of the poor is also common knowledge. The Inspector General of Police has given the instructions to say, pay the benefits and entitlements of these dead officers, but you can be sure, sometimes the duration of the paperwork and the actual releases of the monies. In the meantime, the dependents and survivors of these dead officers will be left high and dry. It is not just the police, it is virtually everywhere. People, we talk about pensioners here, after the exit service, when they're supposed to get their entitlements, it takes more than a year or so for the benefits to accrue to them. So how does an individual plan on that basis? And once a breadwinner's life is suddenly terminated, it's a traumatic experience first for the survivors, and then how they put themselves together, it's a different ballgame. So I think that for us as a society, these are the issues we keep looking at, because we appear not to care so much for the vulnerable and weak amongst us, and that's unfortunate.
I hope we don't get this kind of treatment, and we only hope to see what context the immediacy, directed by the IGP will be taken.
I was just trying to link that to the sad demise of our first female combat helicopter pilot.
Okay, no.
Can you imagine that? She died from auto accident, not in action. She has been part of the war against bandits in the northwest, and they had a base in Minna. And
who's that?
Her name is Tolulope Arotile. She died on a motor accident in Air Force Base in Kaduna, not flying and in combat, sadly. And she, in last October, two ladies, they were the first in the 57 years of the Nigerian Air Force for us to have a fighter pilot, and a helicopter gun pilot.
I must
Now we have lost her now.
Sorry, I must as well mention the passing of Henrietta Okaigwe. I think she's one of our foremost female sports. Yes, and she passed yesterday, and that's news from the Nigerian Football Federation yesterday. May her soul rest in peace. Okay, let's quickly. Kingsley, have other stories.
Well, there are other stories on the front page of the Nation newspaper. Some, of course, we've taken already from our news bulletin. Senate prescribes life jail for kidnappers. That's page 4. Counseling WASC may trigger criminality, says Afeba Balola. That's page 7. Mago, government's anti-corruption focus won't shift. Buhari assures Nigerians. And below that, Edo 2020. Protest in Edo over Obasaki's plan to take 20 billion naira loan. Another one says sponsored protests can't distract voters. Details on page 6. We already took the story on the 774,000 jobs. NDDC forensic auditors to examine 8,000 documents, says Akpabio. NDDC forensic auditors to examine 8,000 documents, says Akpabio. And agencies' liabilities hit 2 trillion naira. IMC, that's Interim Management Committee, fails to explain 142 billion naira shortfall. And Lagos won't lament about doctor strike, says governor. That's on pages 2 and 3.
Are you done?
That's right.
Okay, let me quickly take the others, Bayo, so you can wrap up. Let's take the stories trending just above the nameplate. Overrule Education Minister on WAEC. Reps tell Buhari, it's on page 8. Virtual court sitting not unconstitutional. Supreme Court rules, page 9. COVID-19 cut off 40% of our revenue. That's coming from the Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, on page 18. And the other trending stories just at the foot of the paper. Tom insists 50 million naira bounty remains on fleeing Ghana, page 9. Reps to probe alleged 365 soldiers' resignation is on page 2. Nasarawa's 14-year-old girl commits suicide over unwanted pregnancies on page 16. Now, stop southern Kaduna killings. Senate tells military police on page 7. Gunmen invade Kaduna community, kill 1, abduct 20. It's on page 9. And finally, troops repel Boko Haram's attack on Maiduguri military barracks. Details of that on page 16. Bayo, just a couple of minutes for you.
Yes, I wanted to draw attention to the Senate that passed for third reading the prescription for life imprisonment for kidnapping. Before now, the punishment for kidnapping was for 10 years imprisonment. In amending the Criminal Code, Cap 38 of 2004, they also looked at several other issues, which include gender restrictions on rape. They now have a new definition for rape. Boys and men, too, according to the amendment, are capable of being raped. And there was a status of limitation on rape before. Within 2 months, you had to report or forget about the case. But now, as soon as the person is confident enough to go and bring up the case shall subside. So it has a very long term and almost an indefinite time for that criminality to be brought to book. Lest we forget, COVID-19, Governor Ifeanyi Okowa and the wife and daughter have now tested negative. You recall on June 30th, they reported testing positive. The daughter was first to test positive. And the governor is grateful to Deltans Nigerians for their prayers and support. Meanwhile, as at yesterday...
You're on borrowed time.
Yes, I've taken note. I just wanted to update us on our status as far as COVID-19 is concerned. Yesterday, 463 cases, and our death toll has now reached 754.
Not our death toll, Bayer. Death toll. Don't own it.
It's our fellow Nigerians.
Yes, but
unfortunately,
don't own the death part of it. They toll. Yes.
I don't want to die, but the fact remains that we have lost 754 Nigerians. We must emphasize that so that our compatriots across the country will know that COVID-19 is serious.
All right. But the editorial this morning, I just read out a part of it.
Yes.
It's from Nigerian Pilot, and it's on EFCC and the corruption of anti-corruption campaign. Now, it says from Magu, NDDC, Ngige, and NSITF, that's of course the Social Insurance Trust Fund, SAGA, as well as several others. The corruption enterprise under the government of President Buhari has been fully deregulated. But of course, we know that the fact that all those people are having these issues is also an indication, that the corruption is, fight against corruption is on course, isn't it?
Well, the editorial is saying that the agency, one of the agencies, EFCC, that is responsible for fighting corruption, is now immersed in alleged corruption. Presently, there is an investigation presided over by retired Justice Ayo Salami. They are investigating him. It is when the investigation is completed and he's found culpable, then he will could be tried for corruption. If at the end of the day he's exculpated from all the allegations, then, but the editorial is citing instances of corruption in the NISTF, as well as NNDC, and also EFCC. But the presidency has said the fact that the man who is in charge of fighting corruption is also being investigated exemplifies the fact that there are no sacred cows. And it means that the fight against corruption, it doesn't spare anybody, and whoever is found suspected to be involved in corrupt practices will be accordingly investigated and prosecuted.
That's a wrap, Bayo.
Thank you.
For today. Kingsley, you're quiet.
Well, there's nothing else to add. I mean, the facts speak for themselves, as the saying goes. Res, Mr. Loquito. Bayo, we would like to thank you for being around. We'll see you again tomorrow.
I was going to tell you that the worry thing is that it's not the first time Attorney General and EFCC chairman I haven't tussled. It's been there during Ribadu, it's been there during Farida Waziri, and we need to be careful about the authority of the AGF supervising the EFCC.
The words of our elders, they say,
forward, yes.
You remember? The words of our elders.
Our words of wisdom.
All right.
I'd like to thank you for being around today. We'll see you again tomorrow.
Thank you too.
Okay, it's Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. We're taking a short break now. When we return, to be time for our conversation.
The coronavirus, also known as COVID-19, is spreading at an alarming rate all over the globe, including Nigeria. With the number of infected persons in Nigeria increasing daily, prevention is better than cure. Coronavirus has no cure. The virus spreads from one person, who affects two persons, and by the time the affected person is isolated, the two persons have affected four, and it keeps spreading. You must take preventive measures to save yourself and that of the people around you. Always wash your hands with soap and water. Put distance between yourself and others. Whenever you cough or sneeze, cover your mouth. Clean and disinfect surfaces. Stay at home if you're sick and contact the proper authorities. Together, we can cut down the spread of the coronavirus. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest TV network.
Welcome, dear. Have you washed your hands?
Inside my house again. This thing not the key black man.
I don't know if it's misinformation or poor hygiene that will kill you first. Coronavirus is real, and good hygiene practice will save your life. Anyway, no hand washing, no eating.
I will not take care of it. How's one of the parents? Coronavirus is real and it's on the rise. But you can help yourself and help others to be safe. Remember, we can stop the spread. It's in your hands.
This message is from the Akinfade Foundation in partnership with the National Orientation Agency with support from MacArthur Foundation.
From 5:30 p.m. on NTA. The Premier League Live is brought to you by Access Bank and Babai Jebu.
Coronavirus is real. Steps to avoid this pandemic. Wash your hands regularly or sanitize your hands. Keep social and physical distancing. Avoid crowded places. Stay at home unless absolutely necessary. Don't touch your eyes, nose, or mouth if your hands are not clean. Avoid the spread of coronavirus. Coronavirus is real.
Nigerians, coronavirus is dangerous. It can kill. When you see this sign, high fever, cough, shortness of breath, drowsiness, pneumonia, don't panic, don't hide, don't embark in self-medication. Promptly visit the nearest medical facility. Report all cases to the nearest hospital. Prevention is key. Avoid contact with infected persons. Avoid crowded areas as much as possible. Wash your hands regularly. Use hand sanitizers. Your life is precious. Stay alive. Live long, live right. This message is sponsored by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture and the Nigerian Film Corporation. Nigerian Film Corporation, powering possibility.
Watching Good Morning Nigeria live on the network service of Africa's largest television network, the Nigerian Television Authority. Now, just before we commence our conversation on the revised 2020 Appropriation Act, let's listen into this background put together by our correspondent, Kunle Adeyeye.
The federal government responded to the sharp drop of crude oil price and the devastating effects of coronavirus on the economy by revising the 2020 Appropriation Act. The revised budget of 10.81 trillion naira has an increase of 216 billion naira over what was initially proposed in the 2020 Appropriation Act. President Muhammadu Buhari, while signing the budget, disclosed that some progress have been made in the implementation of the 2020 Appropriation Act, saying the sum of 253.33 billion naira have been released for the implementation of capital projects. The new budget now has 2.4 trillion naira for capital expenditure, 4.9 trillion naira for recurrent expenditure, and 2.6 trillion naira for debt services. The oil benchmark in the budget has been reduced from $57 per barrel to $25 per barrel, and crude production has been reduced from 2.18 million barrels to 1.94 million barrels per day in the revised budget. The Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, also disclosed that 5.365 trillion naira of the budget will be funded by domestic and foreign borrowing, while direct revenue funding will cover 5.158 trillion naira. President Muhammadu Buhari promised that ministries, departments and agencies will receive no less than 50% of their amended capital budgets before the end of July 2020. Besides the implementation plan of the revised 2020 Appropriation Act of the federal government, are there other suggestions that can complement the revised budget implementation? Will there still be need for a supplementary budget? These and other pertinent questions will be adequately treated on Good Morning Nigeria in a moment.
All right, welcome back to the program. If you've just joined us, you're on to Good Morning Nigeria and the network service. And today we're looking at the revised 2020 Appropriation Act. And let me quickly introduce our guests here in the studio. We have with us the Senior Special Advisor to the President on Legislative Matters at the Senate, and is Senator Babajide Omowurare. Thank you very much for joining.
Good morning. Good morning, Nigeria.
And we also have Anthony Chibo Christopher. He's an economic strategist and professor of international business economics at the Swiss Business School, Switzerland. I'd like to thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning. Good morning.
All right.
All right, gentlemen, I'd like to have you with us this morning. Let's begin with the Senior Special Assistant to the President, Senator Omowurare. It's a bit of an irony that at a time when Nigeria and indeed the National Assembly strove mightily to return the budgetary cycle to January to December, and which saw to the passage of the 2020 Appropriation Act in December of last year, and then suddenly coronavirus exploded around the world and Nigeria has been impacted, and we're back again scrambling to take a look at the figures, and now we have the revised Appropriation Act for 2020. What's your comment on this?
Well, thank you very much. My comment is that it's not an irony. We took, painfully, we ensured that the budget was passed on time,
However, just like you said, in view of the pandemic, which really hit the Nigerian economy very hard, and not just in Nigeria, everywhere else in the world, there was need to make an instant response to it. And this, I think, is the international best practice. And I'm of the view that this is actually following the long-lasting principle, which I think is what is called, economists call Keynesian theory, John Milton Keynes, of reflecting the economy when you're on the verge of, when the economy is on the verge of collapse, or when there is such pandemic that has adverse effect on the economy. You ensure capital projects are done. You rejig the budget with a view to excluding the provisions that will waste funds, and you concentrate on saving and protecting business, employing a lot more people, and providing generally stimulus for the economy, to sustain the economy. The irony of it all is that you have to keep spending more in situations like this. We are still working towards having the 2021 budget delivered on time, starting with the MTF, Medium-Term Expenditure Framework, in furtherance of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Once that is done, it will not take effect until January. The MTF comes in, passed, the 2021 budget comes in for processing. We are hoping it comes on time. September is the target. If it spends a few, 1-2 months in the National Assembly, comes out for process, is signed into law. Takes effect, of course, the finance bill will also come in, looking at means of funding the budget, from capital gains tax to withholding tax to personal income tax act to company income tax act, and so on and so forth, value-added tax and the rest of them, custom and excise act and stuff. So by the time we're able to do that, we are of the view that the current revised budget will take us to the end of the year. The economy sustainability program drawn up by the committee set up by Mr. President, which the Vice President chaired, has really given a comprehensive stimulus plan with timeline and cost, and most especially with implementation. Who is responsible for what? It's not as if nobody is responsible for taking action. Who is responsible for what? I think it is now for to ensure monitoring and evaluation, and ensure implementation and oversight.
Okay.
And we take it from there.
Okay. You said the fact that, because Kingsley asked, that ironically, why did we have to revise? You said it's not, ironical. What will probably be ironical for a lot of Nigerians is the fact that the revised budget, was increased in a state where we're having global oil price, dwindling global oil price. We have all the unsteady, global oil price. We are having the impacts from COVID-19. And then we're increasing our, revised budget by over 260, billion. Isn't it ironical?
Well, like I said, you have to keep spending more. And don't forget again that and this is also the irony again, is that the National Assembly is always labeled wrongly so as rubber stamp. But don't forget that they tinkered with the budget. They have the power to do so in the Constitution, and they tinkered a little bit with the budget. The budget parameter with respect to the cost of crude oil, the estimated cost of crude oil, from $25 per barrel to $28, that was the difference we're looking at. Of course, the estimated quantum of crude oil to be pumped every day from 1.9 million barrels per day was reduced to 1.8. So these are the fractions we're talking about. So my own position is always that once there is monitoring and evaluation, once we're able to generate a lot of employment, once we ensure that all the stimulus put in place to ensure that micro, small, and medium-scale enterprises do not crash, and will reflect the economy. I think the economy will bounce back. The capacity to implement and the capacity to monitor and evaluate and the capacity to oversight. That is what I think we need.
All right, Chibo Christopher, let's bring you into the conversation at this time. Tell us, I mean, from a philosophical point of view, has the 2020 appropriation budget, as revised, responded adequately to the challenges thrown up by the coronavirus against the background of what was passed in December last year in record time, and then the irony, of course, of having to scramble again to take a look at it?
You said, thank you for the question. You said philosophically. First of all, I think it's important to commend the government for the timely. It's the first time it ever happened, to the best of my knowledge, that budget was presented to run from January to December. Unfortunately, coronavirus came up. However, when such a thing happens, it's normal. It's very normal. It didn't happen to Nigeria alone, but when it's normal to revise. You can see the AFDB did it. Other countries did it, to revise what you have planned. And in this particular case now, I see the budget's in the right direction. You can see the stimulus package. You also see that the central bank is trying to inject, I think, 2 trillion into the economy. And but the main point here, if you look at the budget in its face value, you jump straight to implementation. Implementation, implementation, implementation. I'd like to use a word called implementation sincerity. So the most important thing I see here is the capital expenditures, to answer your question, because that's what touches the people. The more you spend on capital expenditure, the more the people feel it. So how are you going to implement your capital expenditures? Where are you going to get the money to fund it? I'm aware that there's a lot of borrowing, and good borrowing, as I can see from investigation. And if that goes through, very good.
What do you mean good borrowing?
Good borrowing is who you're borrowing from. When you're borrowing from financial development institutions, good. When you're borrowing, in my opinion, when you're borrowing from a bilateral, even the percentages shall tell you the differences there. And again, why it is good is because of the monitoring and evaluation that comes from borrowing from the financial development institutions. They come with a lot of oversight, they come with a lot of monitoring and evaluation, and money is released according to performance. What are the key performance indicators? They decide along with you, and no money is given to you till you reach your benchmarks. So that's good borrowing. Execute your capital expenditures. It's okay that you have a stimulus program. It's okay that you're injecting funds, but again, it's not the issue of injecting funds, but where are you injecting the funds to? And at the risk of sounding like a broken record economist, you've got to inject funds, number one, in the short and long term, into your human resource. The capacity for a country to absorb the shock of what has just happened to Nigeria and the world is directly proportional to the capacity of its human resource, its workers, the earning ability. So the earning ability in the past, before the shock. And the more skillful your population is, the more they earn. I'm talking of internationally and locally. And if this is so, then you see that the number of people you have to provide, can I use the word palliatives? The number of people you have to carry out of problems reduces because you have a skillful and earning population. So if I was to say something about where you're supposed to spend on it may not look like something you should do now, but it is one of the most important things you should do, even as you're trying to what do I call it, cushion the effects of COVID-19. Very, very important. Capital expenditures also. Then, infrastructure. When I say this, it's important to note that business is business, and the business of individuals and corporations follows the same rules with the business of a nation. And there's one thing I'd like to drop in here. You must add value to everything you do. And that includes oil, agriculture, human resource I just talked about. But let's talk about oil. I would have liked to see in the budget the adding of, at least the attempt, the thinking of the adding of value to our crude oil. What do I mean by that? With all humility, it makes no sense to me to be producing at $21, selling
21, 22.
Okay.
21, 22.
21, 22, fine. Selling at, projected selling at 28. You see the small margin there. Exporting it at such a value and only importing it back as a refined product, an added value product, at a subsidized rate. Even you don't need to be an economist to see this.
Subsidy is gone, we're told.
We're told.
Subsidy is gone.
Yes, and if it is gone, that is really good. But the point I want to make here is that add value to your oil. How do you add value to your oil? Refine it. The business of exporting it and bringing it back does not provide as much jobs, as much cushion to the economy as it would be to refine it here and export the refined product not only not only for local consumption, but for the region. I know for certain that many regional countries would partner with Nigeria if we were to refine oil for them, and that's getting more. You've added value to your oil, you've provided jobs, and you've made more money for your crude.
Already, I think we're, from the available statistics, we're even producing at a higher cost than other, countries on the international market, and all that. So that already, it's a problem for us. Yeah. It's a problem. But let me put you on hold and come to the senator. He asked a question. It depends on what we are spending. And I'd like for you to tell us, for instance, we are told that 50% or nothing less than 50% of the capital budgets for MDAs will be made available by the end of the month, wherever, at least they will get 50% of the capital project. Do we know what capital projects these MDAs will be spending this money on?
The budget has, almost every ministry, department and agency has its capital components, apart from the recurrent component, and which I agree with him, we have to spend a lot more on capital than recurrent. But giving you for example, in the transportation sector, a lot of money is being spent on the rail project at the moment. A lot of money is being spent on power sector. A lot of money is being spent on works on roads, delivery of roads. I agree that we have to spend a lot more on capital. So those are the areas that the government is spending on with respect to capital. I agree entirely with the idea of...
That's just transport.
No, beyond transport, almost every facet, every ministry, environment, there are capital projects, replete all over the place, the flooding projects, and so on and so forth. Almost every ministry has capital component, even information ministry has capital component. But the point I'm making is that we have to spend a lot more on capital than recurrent. The balance has tilted towards recurrent over the years. Bloated overhead, bloated personnel, and so on and so forth. It will change gradually. That's my view. We must be committed to changing it, to spend a lot more. I'm looking forward to a situation whereby the converse will be the case, that we'll be spending 70% on capital and 30% on recurrent. So I am of the view that we must work towards that trajectory. But for now, we have to get out of the quagmire we are, as it were, and which every other country is, by ensuring implementation. And I always say this, all this information out there is for people to key into, For instance, the 774,000 jobs to be which will soon start. It's obvious that everybody will have access to it. It's not just going to be for, what what we call in the past Nigerian factor, that just few people.
So there'll be justice in access.
There will be justice in access. I can assure you that that will be done, and almost all agencies. CBN has a lot of programs at the moment. People should try and key to it. The civil society must also ensure that this timeline and the implementation process, as the Economic Sustainability Committee working with the Economic Council of Mr. President, but there are also other levels of ensuring implementation. There is a ministerial committee to ensure implementation, and questions should be asked. There are programs that should be completed in 3 months, and these are capital projects. These are projects that are actually, designed to increase employment, because we have to get about 40% of Nigerians are earning probably less than 11,000 naira every month. That position must change. We must ensure that so many more Nigerians earn a lot more.
Okay, I was just wondering, earlier, Chibo Christopher was talking about healthy borrowing as a component for the funding of the 2020 appropriation. I was just when you were interacting with the National Assembly in ensuring that the President's request for a revision of the 2020 Appropriation Act went through with little glitches. What was the attitude of the lawmakers to the country's appetite for borrowing?
Well, the executive explained the source of the funding to them, the terms of the funding. And for every borrowing that is made, there is always this approval from the National Assembly. And to get the approval done, the respective committees on finance and appropriation will be involved, even to pass the budget. But to get the borrowing done, the Committee on Finance in particular, we ask questions from the minister, from the DG Budget, and a lot of other people that are interested. Debt Recovery Office, they will look into the papers, they will look into memos, they will look into terms of the agreement. What is the interest rate, what is the repayment plan, and what is the debt GDP ratio of Nigeria? Are we still within that margin? So that basically is it. I attended a few of the meetings, I attended some of the meetings, and I know that they insisted on oversight. They insisted being, getting carried along all the time. The parliamentarians insisted getting carried along all the times. And basically, oversight. They must have access not only at the time of obtaining the confirmation, the approval, but they must be able to make inquiries, what is happening, how is the repayment plan going. And I don't think the executive has any problem with that, doing that, furnishing them with information.
Well, part again, to use the phrase of Chibo Christopher, the National Assembly is satisfied with the heavy borrowing that the country is undertaking. Is that correct?
For now, I don't think, if they have any complaint, they will not have approved it.
Fine.
Okay.
Chibo Christopher, that's a point that we also have to look at. The real impact of the attempt to reflate the economy through spending and the President's directive to the Honorable Minister of Finance that 50% of capital releases should be available to the MDAs by the end of July. The impact would be through, many argue, the availability of local content in this whole project. And that has become all the more imperative against the backdrop of the disruptions in global supplies. We have seen how some of our goods, have vanished off the shelves. Medicine security is in jeopardy, for instance, and so on and so forth. Are we in a position to immediately catalyze local content for this purpose? Or what are the intermediate steps that we need to take to ensure that, yes, the President says release 50% to the MDAs, how much local content can we get in? And if so, or if not, what do we need to do?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Impact. I think we should start with something like, I think we've heard it before, to ensure, first of all, let's benchmark impact, not by implementation, not by actually spending what is appropriated, but let's base it, to your word, on the impact on the society. So if we're going to base implementation on impact on society, then I think we should start first with outcome-based budgeting, which is, first of all, let's discuss what the outcomes are. Let's discuss what it is that we really expect. What do we want? Leave the money and appropriation first. What is it that we really want to happen from this period to that period? Okay? And then, secondly, let's inject strict, again, that word again, monitoring and evaluation towards those outcomes. Because when you do that, when you talk about an outcome before you put money, it changes this perspective. For instance, okay, I want to provide jobs, 1,000 jobs, okay? And you say, but because you're forced to talk about the outcome, you're asked in your budgeting process, what are you expecting? So the jobs are where? Not the number of jobs now, but where are the jobs for, and what are the purpose of the jobs, and what is the long term and also short term. Short term is so it alleviates poverty, it cushions COVID-19. But a job as a history, I don't mean any, please, I don't see any sector as inferior to the other. But today in 2020, a job in a field like an art field or something like that is not going to be as strategic as a job that it requires you learning Python and it gives you the skills of MATLAB, gives you the skills of R. Why am I mentioning these things now? Because these are the skills of the future. So if you're going to spend money, why don't you spend money and make sure that you're giving people training while doing jobs in these fields? And that's impact. That's the impact I expect, and that's only achieved by starting from outcome-based, budgeting. Very important to do that. I don't know whether I should.
Well, not exactly.
Okay.
You talked about, I mean, you went now to be looking at the outcomes, also the impact. But I'm saying, let's reduce it to the government's expressed desire to also ramp up local content. I mean, we know what's happening in the oil and gas industry. We've had that conversation here on Good Morning Nigeria. And what measures the board, for instance, Local Content Development and Management Board, is taking to encourage more local inputs into the production process. But we're saying, for the MDAs, federal government says, look, you are getting your capital releases 50%. In terms of monitoring and evaluation, how do we ensure that a great deal of local content relevant to the implementation of the budget gets to be activated? Because when you are sourcing local content, when you are transporting local content, when you are adding value, that's when the jobs get created, and that's where money comes into people's pockets. I mean, not when you are looking for the next cargo plane to bring in the supplies from wherever else in the world.
Oh, sorry. No, who was that? Can I?
Okay. If you could take it off.
The outcome itself is input from the beginning, which is so number of activity or production must be done by local companies. That's your input outcome from the beginning. Let's take, for instance, let's do something. Let's say something. If for a state like Texas has over 250 whether modular or mini refineries, operated by Texans, not by the Big Five. If your outcome now is that there must be an input of entrepreneurial Nigerians in the oil refining sector. Automatically, you are moved by logic to license or at least implement the licenses already given to the modular refineries. That has a spiraling effect down the road. Why? Because right now we're exporting. I mean, we're taking our crude out. Absolutely no reason why indigenous, whether they're going to partner with the expertise, and I am moving towards this expertise, learn it now, but I've said that before. But the expertise must be local, and let the local people add value to our crude oil. That's that's a very heavy way of doing what you've just said. But it has to come from putting it at the outcome. Because if you just say you're injecting it into this sector without actually spelling out that, look, this sector, 50%, if you come out and say 50% of our refining is local, seems ambitious, right?
Well, not exactly. I mean, modular refineries are coming on stream, even though we're having issues here and there. Modular refineries, but I mean, the real money guzzlers, Kaduna Refinery, the two Port Harcourt refineries, water refineries, nothing appears to be on the card. But let's come back to Senator Mawara.
Can I just ask
local content?
Yes, a question. Talking about the local content now, I just like to take it from a different perspective. And if you look at development models, they come with goals, and the goals are benchmarked with targets, indicators, and timeframes, achievable. So you can benchmark, you can monitor, and you can evaluate. So do we have, such model, attached to this?
I think we now have it. I will explain that what we were used to. Don't forget that when we used to have the development plans in those days, they were target-oriented. We want to set up Ajaokuta for the purpose of doing these following things, but in the interim, we will assemble vehicles and so on and so forth. And we had timelines. Along the line, we lost that traction. But what we've learned of recent, just like you said, who is going to import or export when there is lockdown? The pandemic has given us the reality now. We have, just with the economic sustainability plan, it has timeline. That's the beauty of it. And I know that the plan that the Minister of State for Budget and National Planning is working, they're working on a short-term, a mid-term, and a long-term project. I think questions should be asked, and we must ensure that we have timeline in all of this. The output and the outcome of whatever we plan must be part of the objectives. We must have KPIs, more or less. We must have benchmark. Within this period, we want to do this. And all of us must now be watchdogs, not just leaving it to the executive arm of government or the legislature, as the case may be. But that's why I keep saying, even the CSOs must ask a lot of questions, especially in this direction. You have said you will do this within 4 months. Releases have been made and nothing has been done. Because we must even measure this not by the quantum of releases made, but by impact.
Yes, because
that is the only way there will be value addition. That's the only way.
Distinguished. While I ask is, the tradition has always been, budget is made, and we have, okay, this is budget for a fiscal year, and these are the products, these are the achievables, these are the deliverables. But we are not benchmarking these deliverables, but targets, goals, and specific time frame. Because if we have that, then the CSOs and the NGOs will be able to, follow and monitor.
I think that has been done now. That is now being done. So we must just build on that and ensure that subsequent budgets, and really that is part of what the Minister for Finance, Budget and Economic Planning does when she gives the wrap-up on the budget after the President has assented to it. And back to the local content issue. From all indication and with the plans, the programs, the projects, it is obvious that we are relying a lot more on local content. If you look at the plans of Ministry of Works, is to use as much local materials as possible, because you may even have challenges with accessing materials. And I'm aware that there are 3 bills pending on local content, going beyond just oil and gas, spreading local content to every facet of governance, pending in the National Assembly now. I'm sure in the next few weeks they're likely to come out too, with a view to giving teeth to the position of the executive on local content development.
All right, Kingsley, we have Niyi Akinshijo, the financial and investment analyst, of course, one of our regulars on Good Morning Nigeria. This time he's joining us via Zoom from Akure. Niyi, thank you for joining us for this conversation. As always, I'm sure the last time we had a conversation on the stimulus plan, you were also with us. But specifically for the revised budget, 2020 budget, what are the big concerns for you now?
Good morning, and thank you for having me. The revised budget, I think is part of the continuum in the engagement of the negative consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. Any creative-minded, predictive-minded economist would understand the fact that the national current accounts of all sovereign states will be affected, with the pandemic, the lockdown, the social distancing, and of course the halt to virtual.
We'll return back to Niyi Akinshijo joining us via Zoom. We just want to correct some technical connections there. Okay, I think he's back now.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay. All right. So I was saying that the major crisis we've had to contend with as a result of consequence of this COVID-19 pandemic has been a deficit in our national current account. Our current account is the difference between the value of our imports and our exports. And as at the first quarter 2020, we had $5 billion, though a deficit when compared to the same period in 2019. But more grievous is the statistics or the figure. The figures we've had for the months of April and May. The value of our current account, the national current account, has gone to as low as $1.2 billion, dollars. Now, what that tells you is that we will be constrained in terms of our fiscal sufficiency and capacity. So this actually must have informed the revision of the budget, because the whole thing is functioned or pivoted on federally collected revenue. And now, if federally collected revenue is constrained, so much that about $1.8 trillion naira that we're expecting from the oil and gas sector have to be reduced to 258 billion. It means there was, a crisis is in the making, and other collectibles, either from the non-sector, the non-air sector, either in terms of the income tax, company income tax, the customs and excise expected generated fiscal revenue and all that. So there was a need to supplement these shortfalls, and to supplement them, the president had to take the budget, the 2020 budget, as it were, back to the National Assembly, so that new sources of income, and of course, the budget itself has to be aligned with our objective reality as currently, constituted, as it were. So now, because of those fiscal shortfall, we are talking of raising funds, from multilateral institutions, we've been able to secure $3.4 billion from the IMF. The World Bank they're giving us an initial $772 million as it were. The same with the African Development Bank and all that. Now, these are efforts, to source the fiscal budget or the Appropriation Act, as it were, so that we'll be able to still sustain the momentum, that we're coming on from 2019. So to also had let me also add that the National Assembly, were also conscious and conscientious in not forgetting to have a 500 billion intervention fund, already approved by the Federal Council. So the whole thing is actually targeted at containing the impact of the pandemic, and of course, ensuring that we continue on expansionary spending so as to help capital provision, help infrastructure provision, which is very important to the economy as it were.
Naya Kinsijo, I still would like to stay with you. I had asked this question and the other two guests had responded. But tell us something. The president says by end July, at least 50% of capital releases to the MDAs should be in their respective vaults. Now, what is the likely or projected trickle-down effect of this against the background of sourcing or increasing local content in our spendings? Are we in a position to galvanize local content along with this spending so that indeed the money is available in people's pockets and elsewhere around the economy?
Well, I think the whole budget, as it were, is pivoted on on local content because one, if you look at the 100 billion naira targeted at the pharmaceutical industry, the pharmaceutical and medical related industry, it is to boost activities in that segment of the economy. So much that our pharmaceutical and medical laboratory units or entities would be energized to start contributing to the GDP. That is one. Then two, I also realized that the Nigerian Local Content Development Agency actually increased the funding available, for the activities of entities in that sector. And if you latch this on, if you contextualize it into the the economic stimulus plan, you will see the obvious collaboration or the obvious relationship between the revised budget and the ESP, because the ESP and this budget are actually talking about local content. The 500 billion naira intervention, for instance, is targeted at the Nigerian agricultural sector, at the Nigerian manufacturing sector, the Nigerian mineral resources sector, and these are principally local players in the economy.
We'll leave our engineers to talk to your connection. It's freezing at some point, but we'll return to you. Let me, throw the question to Chibo here. Again, he talked about the borrowings. Okay. Already we've gotten $33.4 billion. I know you will talk about the moratorium, which of course makes payment easier for us, and you described it as good borrowing. But is it more prudent, to source externally at this point in time than to look inwards?
Yes, I understand. Most people, I understand the apprehension towards borrowing. Anybody would be apprehensive. But it must be stated that you must borrow. You must borrow. You cannot avoid borrowing. And let me try and give some explanation to that. If you're going to develop, take for instance, you have planned, our vision 2050 and our vision 5-point-something billion and our vision 2030.
2030 agenda.
Yeah. Okay, so if you're going to achieve that, then you must spend heavily on infrastructure and every other thing. Okay, now if you are to save, if you are to save, start from today now to save 5 billion, let me just put you would probably get it in about 3 years time from your economy.
But if you consider the fact that we are gaining some, margin, the oil price is up now. It's about 30, 40.
Remind me to say something about the volatility of oil, but so that I remain with my thought here. If you want to do it prudently, we're taught to, don't borrow. And you want to save 500, and in 3 years' time, the project outcomes and the project that you have done, the cost to implement and achieve that will double. So it is wise, as uncomfortable as it may be, to actually borrow at lending rates between 0 and 2%. That's why I advise that it should be within these financial years. And implement these things, because if you want to be, it's like being penny wise and pound foolish. If you want to actually wait and raise the money from your economy, by the time you get there to achieve the same thing, the cost of doing, nobody's waiting. The cost of things will go up. And of course, the advantage is that don't go to where bilateral lending, where you would get it at 5-6%. Go where you would get it at 0 point. And if you don't go there, and if you can't get it, then something is wrong with your
servicing.
Exactly. So I think that was the question. If I may just add something from the other, if you do not lay your outcomes, spell them out from the beginning, you're going to run into problems. Why? If you say you're going to spend in manufacturing, good thing, isn't it? Yeah, but many of the manufacturers are importing. Hello, they're importing. So I'm talking of the local contents. You have put money in manufacturing because the manufacturers are Nigerians, fine. But the manufacturers are importing, so the money is still going out. So spell it out. Spell it out from the beginning, that we're putting money in manufacturing to achieve this outcome. And the outcome is that local 50-60%.
That's the model that works.
That's the only model that will work right now. Oil, you mean volatility. Yes. It must be said with all humility that we're doing well. We're doing, for now, this budget, the intention behind this budget is to get Nigeria out of the problem it finds itself. Beautiful. However, any budget that is based on a resource that is not renewable, 1, a resource that is volatile, 2, a resource that you have no control over the pricing, that budget is look for a good word for me. The budget has a lot to be improved on. Okay. You understand what I mean? So I just thought I should put that in.
All right, Chibo Christopher, thank you very much. I mean, we know that the government faces acute revenue challenges, and we have seen the steps being taken by the major revenue collectors, FIRS, for instance. We're ramping up stamp duty collection, but it's having issues with NIPOST over that, who is the proper authority to collect it, and so on and so forth. But they expect quite a lot of money to come in from there, even though there are shortfalls here and there. We're going to take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue with the conversation.
For over 70 years, we've protected our homes against germs together. And now is no different. So let's disinfect and protect our floors and surfaces every day. Dettol. Protect what's worth fighting for.
As a strong immune system increases the chances of victims surviving COVID-19, a corruption-free society creates opportunities for citizens to thrive and prosper. Build your immunity. Stop corruption now. Report all acts of corruption to ICPC on this toll-free number, 0800 22 55 4272. This message is brought to you by ICPC and NTA.
Treat your family to a cereal that's made from the natural goodness of maize and soya protein and specially combined with Grain Smart, a smart combination of vitamins and iron, so that they have the right kind of energy to help them reach their full potential and turn the simple into amazing. Eat up and carry go, because nothing do you. Golden Morn, make every day amazing.
Nestle, good food, good life.
The number of the COVID-19 cases in Nigeria is increasing daily, with many more tests ongoing. The battle of testing, isolating, treating, and attending to the affected persons rests heavily on the shoulders of our health workers, constantly putting their lives on the line and at risk to contain this virus, save and protect the lives of millions of Nigerians. To these health workers, we at the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, on behalf of millions of Nigerians, say a big thank you for all that you have done and are doing. To the security agencies enforcing the lockdown and every other frontliner, we say thank you for putting your lives on the line to save ours. There is no amount of words that can quantify our gratitude. Thank you. This message is brought to you by the Nigerian Television Authority, NTA, Africa's largest television network.
All right, you're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria live on NTA's network service. Let's return to Nia Kinsiju via Zoom in Akure. That's the Ondo State capital. Nia, the revised 2020 Appropriation Act is attractive on paper, but let's undertake some reality checks. And all of this, of course, is against the background of the coronavirus pandemic. The budget is expansionary, reflect the economy, spend, and they have to get people to work. But there is also the overhang of what is playing out in respect of the coronavirus. A number of businesses, of course, are not operating at full capacity. Government ministries and departments are also not operating at full capacity. And the PTF, that's the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, has issued a dire warning that if the numbers continue to rise against the backdrop of the flagrant disregard of COVID-19 protocols, wearing face masks, avoiding mass gatherings, that it might be inevitable for the government to reimpose lockdowns. And if you have a lockdown, the economy, of course, is also locked down. So when you have all of this, how are you then going to match this with, say, okay, get capital releases, let them spend money? You're not going to be spending money if there is a lockdown. In fact, some weeks ago on Good Morning Nigeria, we had the Honorable Minister of Transport, Rotimi Amechi, and he said something about his frustration that the president had called him and said, look, the Lagos-Ibadan rail project and indeed other rail projects should be up and running. But the challenge was, how do you get the workers to site at that time when there was a lockdown and our numbers were just climbing? So what is the reality check that we need to undertake in this instance, bearing in mind that our graph is still rising and the curve hasn't flattened, and there just might be further disruptions to normal economic activities?
Well, I think the PTF has a strong handle on the issue of public health as related to the COVID-19 pandemic. And the reality is that this challenge will stay with us for a while, at least until there is a vaccine that is available for emerging and developing markets like ours. I also know that the other option available where there may be a need to lock down will not be about locking down and applying it across the geography, the Nigerian geography. I think it may be targeted. It has been tried, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, where a number of local governments, were identified and highlighted and targeted for lockdown. So rather than have a whole state or a number of states being locked.
All right, Lee Akinshuju. Well, we will keep trying to. Okay, thank you, Director. I'm told Lee is back with us. Lee, can you?
Yeah, it's network. To a large extent, it's the pandemic, it's the challenges of the pandemic that is determining the economic policies that are being applied. So, to my mind, I think the whole thing will just the next level, if there is a need for lockdown, will be to target endemic and this COVID endemic local governments, so that it won't apply across board. The truth of the matter is that our economy, as it were, cannot accommodate, implication or consequences of the lockdown, wholesale lockdown across board. One, we don't have a fiscal bulwark in the real sense of it, where we may have, we usually had the excess crude account of up to an average 4 points before 2017. We don't again. We are trying to build on our reserves, in the national, the Nigerian, the NSIA, the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority. We are just about building our reserves there. It would have been a fallback for us, and unfortunately, our reserve, the foreign reserve, is also low. So at this time, the working policy would be to have a system where we exist alongside the pandemic, and as much public conscientization is made. Now that the threat, not even, it's no longer a threat, the implication of community transmission is with us. I think there's a need to change the texture of the communication, taking it just away from awareness to see how we can start transforming attitude, how we can start changing attitude, because the communication theme must talk to change of attitude and the reality that this pandemic is changing our social relationship and our social existence. So there is a need to start a strategic engagement, away from the normal mass communication, or rather communicating to the people for awareness, for national awareness and past individual awareness. It must now talk to individuals. Our communication must start talking to individuals to start changing, social relationships, because that is what is at the heart of the spread of the pandemic, as it were.
Okay, Niyi, just the last one before we appreciate you. Do you have any concerns at all about this revised budget?
Well, for all budgets, the major concern will be the funding aspect of it. But I think since we have been able to identify our objective reality as a nation, and understand the fact that our cash flow is affected, and therefore we may have to depend on borrowings, to fund our capital, for instance. I think there's already a tradition in place over the last 3-4 years, where a recurrent expenditure are always funded full, from resources generated within the country. And while capital and infrastructural funding, are resourced through borrowings and all that. So I think this is ongoing. Like I noted before, the reality is that our funding is challenged, so much that foreign direct investment, inclusive of foreign portfolio investments, between April and May fell to as low as $1.2 billion, from a high of $5 billion in the first quarter. So that is a major challenge. But we are hoping that our multilateral institutions and other funding bodies that we have found grace, favor in their hearts, will continue to do that. And luckily, we have the capital market in Nigeria that has enough headroom to fund the resource need, the fiscal resource need of the federation. And that is why the federal government, as part of this revised budget, actually changed the sourcing of fund. The 50% or thereabout expected to be funded through international capital, changed it to fund it in a domestic capital and financial market. So if these are taken care of, and we are sure of the targeted products, targeted infrastructure in place, I don't think we have any problem. And more significantly is the fact that the president had directed that 50% of capital expenditure should be released with immediate effect. That is a major and significant step, because it will create liquidity in the system and help boost the economic activities as going forward.
Nia Kinsijo, just again, before we let you go, tell us something. We are seeing some numbers already in terms of rates, a measure of the forex rates, even though there is still the difference between the so-called official window and the parallel market window. We are also seeing inflation climbing. Projection is that it could be close to 13%, and interest rates. What are the likely effects of these numbers on the intended outcomes of the 2020 revised budget?
Well, I think it's also an appropriate strategy to address the shortfall expected, from inflows, foreign inflows. So what it means is that by adjusting, and that is what the CBN used, that's the term the CBN used, rather than say devaluing, adjusting at a time from the 306 official rate to 360, and then from 360, I think now to 380. Now, what this will do is to provide. Let me use the street lingo. Is to increase the money, that will be derived from a dollar. So while before we would exchange at 306 dollars for official purposes, now the exchange will be 380. So in terms of naira, the sharing entities in Nigeria, the federal government, the state government, and the local government, when FAC allocations are being shared, rather than being shared at 306, especially for incomes from abroad, from capital inflow from abroad, it will be shared at 380. So more naira, will be available for expenditure to the three tiers of government. Yes, there would be natural concerns over inflation, but the truth of the matter is that I believe that with targeted policies to boost agriculture over time, we should be able to contain inflation, because the Nigerian problem is actually food inflation, which constitutes 50% of our inflation basket. So once we are able to attend to food inflation and it starts falling, our the umbrella inflation CPI, as it were, will also start falling. But again, if you look at the inflation rates vis-a-vis what the CBN is doing with its heterodox policies, where the rate of the treasury bills, the rate of bonds are falling, and are actually falling sometimes by more than 7% below inflation rate. Now, you would consider the fact that the Nigerian monetary and fiscal environment, is being run unconventionally, but I think it's also providing results, because normally bonds and Treasury rates and all that are supposed to be traded at yield above the inflation rate. But if you have yields below the inflation rate, this is also impacting cost of credit in the commercial banks. So, in a way, it is also attenuating the negative consequences of the credit market, or as derived from the pandemic, as it were. So, I think going forward, this the policy of driving agriculture will reduce inflation rates. I am very sure of that. By the third or fourth quarter of the year, things will start being ameliorated. You know, once food are being harvested, once food crop are being harvested.
Ndi Akinshijo, financial and investment analyst. We'd like to appreciate you as always, joining us, of course, from Akure. Thank you, and do have a pleasant day. All right, let's get back now. We have your contributions via tweets and Kingsley.
Daily Jack Solomon says the federal government must ensure that the 2020 budget, designed to be a budget of fiscal consolidation to strengthen our macroeconomic environment, investing in critical infrastructure, human capital development, and enabling institutions, especially in key job-creating sectors, must be achieved.
Mochana Farouk just says, I'll just edit your tweets quickly. The implementers of the Act, that's the 2020 Revised Appropriation Act, need to start the ball rolling now so as to mitigate the economic hardship of many Nigerians.
Festus Akimboyewa, the harmonization of exchange rates and removal of oil subsidies will generate more money for government to spend on critical infrastructure. I would have preferred government sticking to the original Appropriation Act and borrowing to finance it in order to support businesses and people at work.
Okay, Nuhu Mohammed, this shows the January to December annual budget is on the right track. Now government is able to revise the appropriation before year ends. Can government be able to carry out major projects that will change the narrative?
Akeju Olagbaju, the amended 2020 Appropriation Act has to some extent derailed our quest to change the budget cycle from January to December. We are in mid-year, but there is no guarantee that all capital projects will end this year.
All right, Mike Anyako, revised 2020 Appropriation Act was a step in the right direction for us to get meaningful budget. Now, what does it connote? That we must operate within our budget constraints, living within our income. Every 1 naira spent must be accounted for. No room for frivolities, and this is the way to go. Corrupt agencies have great roles to play because we are already operating on a very tight corner. All hands must be on deck to see the successful implementation of this budget.
Law Alpha say, revising the 2020 Appropriation Act is justified, but I must add that remunerations and entitlements of political office holders should come down in order to enhance healthcare delivery.
All right, Utula Sunday, I will only call on implementation actors that we have limited resources to carry out our budgetary activities, hence they need to be diligent. This pandemic should be good for thought for everyone, food for thought for everyone, that every day is not Christmas.
Chris Simeon, revised or not, what Nigerians want to see is the judicious use of money appropriated for items in the budget.
And no Google Ikechukwu Sevenos, I rather will think that if government will concentrate on building strong and efficient infrastructure, go back to industrialization, create an enabling environment with equal opportunity for private businesses at all levels to compete and stop sponsoring some individuals, we are bound for greater heights.
Yunusa Idris, what bothers me is that the budget is deficit. My prayer and hope is that the appropriation will be implemented to 85%, if not 100%.
Okay, Daily Jack Solomon, this government has acted well on the 2020 capital revised adjustment because we can't give what we don't have. Nevertheless, way forward, we want to see more attention given to capital expenditure over recurrent expenditures. This is the only way to reduce impact of COVID-19.
But Amasi Adamu, what matters most to the downtrodden is the impact of the budget, because there's a difference between what the government agrees to do in principle and what is implemented.
Okay, and on Mogbolan or Babs, the Appropriation Act remains mere estimate. Its efficacy is seen only in the implementation to the latter of its provisions. A budget must meet its deliveries. That's only when the ordinary man on the street can't feel its positive impact.
All right, those are the tweets that we can accommodate in the meantime. Let's return to our two guests here in the Abuja studios to get their closing thoughts on this subject matter. First, Chibo Christopher, what more would you like to see with regard to the 2020 Revised Appropriation Act?
Well, like I said, it's commendable. It was timely. It was reactionary. Very good. What I would like to, as we commend ourselves for a budget that is designed to get out of, to mitigate the situation we find ourselves, we must remember that yes, COVID-19 has come, but we were not doing that well economically even before, COVID-19. So the problems of diversification, that's the word I'd like to leave with us here. We need to be serious about diversifying our economy away from oil so that our budget one day, last words, can be a non-oil budget.
Okay, now that you talked about oil, briefly, in less than 60 seconds, Senator, we are making headway with, the price, the global oil price at $37.40 per barrel. Yes. Now, should OPEC penalize us, for non-compliance with the cuts? Will this budget suffer?
I don't think so, because if you will realize that the compliance is a gradual process, and I'm sure in the next maybe 1 month or thereabout, the past 3 months, there has been improvement in the process of complying. So, but, going forward, I just think that it takes planning well and implementing. And I want to say that the government is committed to both. The government has now planned well by providing the economic sustainability plans and as well as revising the budget. And I'm also saying that the government is committed to implementing. There is no option other than to look at the real sector. And if you look at the plans, agric, mass housing, ICT, and so on and so forth. These are things that will ameliorate the situation of Nigeria, put money in the system, reflect the economy, and ensure that there is value addition, and lastly, to ensure that there is money in the system that regurgitates around everybody.
All right, let me quickly appreciate all our guests here. Of course, distinguished Senator Babajide Omoworare, who is the Senior Special Advisor to the President on Legislative Matters at the Senate. Thank you very much for joining us for this conversation.
Good morning.
Anthony Chibo Christopher, Economic Strategist, Professor of International Business Economics at the Swiss Business School in Switzerland. Always a pleasure to have you. And of course, we've appreciated our own Nii Akinshije earlier on. So, for us here in the studio, that's it for today. Don't forget, we'll be back tomorrow, same time at same station. I am Claire Adilabu Abdurazak.
And I'm Kingsley Osadola, urging you to stay safe and take personal responsibility during this coronavirus pandemic.